Welcome, my co-host, Steve Running. How you doing today? Happy Friday.
I'm doing great, Victor, and happy Friday to you. I'm looking
Awesome.
forward to a wonderful weekend.
Me too. Well, today's topic, was interesting. I just finished up a coaching and training call, and we were talking about commitment. And then part of it, the training went into accountability. So, and I mentioned to them regarding belonging to the Entrepreneurs Organization (EO), and where I mentored an accelerator program, and we hold them accountable. What are your thoughts on like the mastermind groups and holding people accountable? Like you've mentored me, and I follow through, but it's you hold me accountable. What are your thoughts on having accountability group or something like that as it relates to sales?
There are two kinds of groups that I've participated in, um, and they have different purposes and different philosophies. So, for example, you brought up EO. If you're familiar with the Young Presidents Organization (YPO) or CEO or EO, they have a product called Forum. And the idea of a forum is that it's to be a safe place, so there is no judgment. The gestalt is you speak from experience, but nobody measures anybody. And sometimes when the forum groups have gotten out of the gestalt, the proper protocol, and they've become accountable groups, they've faltered. But that's a different kind of group that serves a different kind of purpose. It's almost like brainstorming. And sometimes brainstorming is important, something where there's no criticism, there's no accountability, and so on. And other times, you need a group. I mean, that's why we have boards of directors, and we have executive boards, and we have directors and managers and supervisors and group leaders and so on, because theoretically, um, these are levels of management that are going to keep the subordinate levels accountable and congruent, in other words, aligned to the same set of goals and working together as a team. Um, and so, consequently, it's proven that accountability is essential to running an organization. Um, I have noticed that there are some salespeople who don't want to be measured, and I've always noticed that the salespeople who don't want to be measured are the salespeople who either have decided that they're at the level that they want to stay at and they no longer want to grow, or they're mediocrity or failures. Um, I have never met a salesperson who grew into a success who didn't do it through honest, objective measurement. And honest, objective measurement is another word for holding yourself or being held accountable. Um, and if you're not measuring, if you're not quantifying, if you're not reviewing the numbers and the assumptions that the expectations were set on, if you're not doing that, then you couldn't possibly be improving or getting control of a system that can become more productive and more productive and more productive. I mean, there's tons of books out there. I mean, that's what Kaizen is based off of. It's statistical process controls and so on. But it's accountability. You mentioned the word commitment before. All right. If you're committed, that means you definitely want to perform. Then it means that you're committed to some set of rules, and that you're accountable to those rules, no matter what what behavior we're talking about committing to. All right, whether it's committing to a sales program, or committing to losing weight, or committing to a spouse, which people do all the time. Okay, in front of an audience when they say "I do." Okay, you're making a commitment to meet certain protocols. Anyway, so that's my view on commitments and meetings about commitments and the different types of group meetings that you can have.
And that's great. That's a great thought because we had the same conversation on this call, on the training call that we had, and regarding board of directors and holding people accountable. I like having accountability groups. It helps me stretch further and further and further. And those accountability groups could be learning, it could be in sales, growing, it could be if you work out with a partner, right? They hold you accountable for showing up. I mean, like for example, our calls, right? Um, I I'm I'm held accountable obviously by myself, but I'm also to some degree held accountable by you because if I don't show up and without notice or anything on a regular basis, our podcasts between us probably wouldn't go any further, right? If you don't show up on a regular basis unless something comes out, I'm kind of holding you accountable, right? So you kind of feel that you got to respond because you want to be there, and we're committed to doing this on a weekly basis. But I believe that there's accountability and respect for both sides.
Absolutely. Now, in business, there's sometimes an exception. As a matter of fact, there's a fellow, I think his name was Lance Sectaran, Sectaran or An. And he wrote a book probably about 30 years ago. I'd have to look it up on Amazon, but your audience can do that. And I believe that's the book where he talks about gorillas. And he talks about some examples where companies latched on to people that were so good that their social behavior didn't matter. As a matter of fact, he has one example of a programmer that was just so good at programming. His company bought him a house on the side of a mountain, and he worked remotely because he just was just so far out there that he just couldn't fit in to a normal bureaucratic corporate atmosphere. And we've seen a lot of that when entrepreneurship really took off in the late 80s and early 90s, especially with the .com thing and new technologies coming about. We saw a lot of people who didn't fit the norm come out there and do some really fantastic things because they just didn't think like everyday and normal people. And sometimes if you have an organization that requires the talents of somebody like that, you might have to make a difference. I can see that in an R&D environment, but I can't see that being an especially good idea in a sales environment, although I have seen it happen in sales environments, and I've always seen it ultimately lead to some catastrophic failure. But I mean, if you're trying to build something scalable, and by the way, I think when we first started talking about we started these talks many weeks ago. One of the foundations was scalability, building a sales force that makes your business scalable. You cannot build a scalable business with gorillas as part of the ongoing functional part of the operations of any of the different sectors of your business, whether it has to do with finance, sales, distribution, supply chain, or whatever conversion technology you're using.
Okay, so interesting, but I'm a little confused or regarding your comment about you can't, or maybe I misunderstood it, about accountability in sales not working. Did I misunderstand that?
No. I was not saying that. That you can't be held accountable. I'm saying that, or I said earlier that I've seen environments where, or I've heard often salespeople say, "I'm being micro or macro managed." They use both terms, I think, because they're not sophisticated enough to know which one means what. But the fact of the matter is, what they're really talking about is, I've been getting measured every day, and I don't want to be measured every day. That's the copier salesman that you see playing sports for 6 hours in the afternoon, and then having to get dressed up in the showers real quick to go back to his office to make believe he was selling all day when he reports back to his manager at the end of the day. I've seen those. If you've been in, they show up in the locker room, at the golf course, at the racquetball court. They're all over the place. Yeah, of course they don't want to be measured and held accountable because they're out goofing off. They just happen to be so talented that they can do the minimum that's necessary to keep their jobs, and that's what they do. They're kind of the slackers. They have the most talent, but they have the least work ethic.
That's so true. Like, so for us, when we have a sales specific testing, and we see the difference between, for us, we look at it as someone has the talent, meaning they have all the desires, they have all the skill set, they're just not committed. And when you're not committed, you don't want to be held accountable.
Right. Exactly.
And then the funny part is that in companies that I either had or I was a leader, an executive, and even times that when I was with you, right, when we had rookies coming in, it was amazing how they didn't want to be held accountable and they didn't like it, yet within the few months of holding them accountable, and I was holding them accountable to the manual you created. I remember I looked at that, I go, this is awesome. Do this, right? I mean, like, I'm confused. This is already set up to do it. And then after a while, I've had a few of them come over to me, look, man, I'm sorry, but thanks, you're helping me make money. But at the end of the day, it's almost like the word accountability has a bad connotation to people, and it shouldn't. You should always want to be held accountable for your actions, held accountable for your ability to succeed. And one last thing I'd say is that when I walked into environments where now, in my career, a lot of times I was the cleanup guy. They would bring me in because things weren't performing really well and so forth. And when things, how life is, it takes the most energy to take for a plane to take off is when it's taking off. So to make change, you got to move rather quickly. And there would be times that people would respond to me stating, hey, you act like I'm not working. And I would say, no, if I thought you weren't working, I'd fire you. I know you're working. It's just, are you working on the right things? And I have to hold you accountable that you're working on the key performance or the key metrics so I can help you succeed. That's it.
I agree. That makes perfect sense to me.
Again, so my piece on this one was just, for me, I get, for these sessions here, these podcasts with you, not only are we providing good content for our listeners, but at the same time, I also feel I constantly learn off these conversations, right? There's times you and I don't agree, but that's life. But there's a lot of times we do agree. And the bottom line is that I enjoy learning, right? I'm committed to keep growing myself. And I have an accountability group, right? Because I always want someone to push me further than I push myself.
Right.
Again, Entrepreneurs Organization has been good.
I do know that there are certain issues hiring salespeople. Is if you talk to 50 entrepreneurs and you say, I say I'm in the talent acquisition business, and 50% of them will say, geez, I need advice. I need to know how to hire salespeople. So it's right in the niche that you're in. We actually don't do recruiting of salespeople. It's very seldom. We don't do that. We're in the STEM markets. But the fundamentals I always come down to the same fundamentals, and those are some of the things that we've talked about here. I think that execution requires discipline. My experience is that when I don't have the discipline, the execution gets sloppy, the numbers go down, the ratios suffer, and as a consequence, the end result, the objectives aren't met on time, and that usually costs me money. So discipline is very important. The way you know that you're being disciplined is to measure. Do I get sloppy? Of course, all people get sloppy. around the holidays, we're goofing off, and the discipline sometimes goes out the window, and the numbers suffer. But there's sometimes where you say it's okay. Okay, we can drop a little, a little bit of the discipline. We can have our cake and eat it too. Okay, around the holidays, but then we got to get back on the stick, and the key is to get back on the stick, get disciplined right away when you have to. And sometimes you're right. If you've got inertia, and everybody has slowed down, it takes more energy to get everybody rolling so that they have momentum again. Once they have a momentum, okay, it seems to be easier for everybody to stay disciplined. It's just like exercise, which a lot of people understand. Once you force yourself to get up every morning at 6 and go down, first thing you do, go on the treadmill for 20 minutes. The first week you're forcing yourself to do it. The second week, not so bad. The third week, you're not even realizing that you're getting on it. As a matter of fact, by the fifth week, I'm sleepwalking to the treadmill. Okay, so and I'm like, oh shit! I wake up because the buzzer on the treadmill goes off. Okay, so life is like that. And then something can happen which makes up your schedule. You get out of the habit, and then you have to get back in. I mean, that's life. But really, that shouldn't be happening with a sales team very often. A sales team should have a natural rhythm, and if you walk into an operation where it's fallen out of its rhythm or never had it, it's going to be tough. There's going to be resistance. There's going to be some bad habits that are going to conflict with the good habits that you're trying to reinforce. And it takes energy and effort, and it takes follow-up, and it takes some willpower. And sometimes, as you said, it takes a firing or two. I understand that situation. I agree. And I think anybody who really thinks about it and is really honest with themselves understands that, I've got to be accountable. If I want to achieve this goal, I have to start measuring.
Right. And now you have sales leaders and sales managers that have people reporting to them?
Yes.
Okay. So to some degree, they're holding their team accountable to obviously the end result, but aren't they holding them accountable to the activities?
It depends what you mean by activity. We chop up our measurements into small bite-sized pieces. As a matter of fact, we don't even, although from time to time we talk about revenue, we have no charts that say this is the sales we're looking to target. All right, because that's so far. By the time you do the sale, you've either already fucked it up or not fucked it up. Okay, so we don't even measure. We don't have one of those charts that says this month we've got this much production. Like a lot of companies have the barometer where they have their sales. We don't do that. All right, and I'll tell you, it's interesting because I've been to other companies who follow this philosophy. I don't know where I got it. I think it might have been the fella who said business as a game or something. He was from International Harvester, and they spun off a division that built motors. And this again happened around in the 1980s. That was in a different millennium. We talked about measuring the small segments, and then the end of the process will just happen. So we don't even talk about sales. I can look at the measurements. Like right now, I can lean over and look at a board that has some pins on it that are different colors that tell me measurements, and I can predict how much revenue that board is worth. And that board is between 6 and 12 weeks away from sales. But if all the other things that are supposed to happen in the system happen, that's predicting revenues for 6 to 12 weeks from now. So, and by the way, you can manage day-to-day activity. You can manage hourly activity. You can't, if you have a sales process that is more than an hour long, you can't manage by revenue because people only function in small increments of time. That's the human condition. So you need to break down your sales system into steps that you then have predictable targets. It may be, hey, you've got to make 70 cold calls if you're in an environment where you do cold calls. It may be that you have to mail 3 quotes a day. It may, I don't know. Everybody has a different system. It might be that you have to respond back to 2 requests for proposals a week. But every business, every sales system has spots where you can measure, and as long as you maintain the ratios from one step to the next to the next to the next, you can predict from step 1 what your production is going to be at the end of step 12, provided everything stays disciplined from step 1 to step 12. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't black swans. It doesn't mean that there aren't crazy things that'll change events. A hurricane comes in and wipes out your region, and suddenly your customers are busy fixing their buildings and houses and stuff. I mean, there's aberrations, but outside of the aberrations, if you have a predictable system and you work it, and you're accountable to it, you should be able to, from step 1, from the very first step, look at the numbers today and tell me what your sales are going to be 6 weeks from now, or 6 months from now, or 6 years from now, depending on your sales cycle. And if you can't do that, then you haven't worked on your system well enough.
And that's a great point. But I guess I was going to where, let's just say the board, right? And I'm familiar with it.
Yeah.
Okay. When you look at the board, and if the board is not to your satisfaction, forget about, or it's not to the satisfaction of the sales manager, that's when accountability starts coming into place. Is that a fair statement?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Now, it means that there's some troubleshooting. It's that some steps before this step are having a problem, and that means that you have a manager to investigate. I mean, it could be that you have somebody that doesn't have the skill to do the job, so they need to be trained. It could be that somebody doesn't understand the expectations, so you have to clarify the expectations. It could be that somebody doesn't have the tools, or the tools got lost, or the tools aren't sharp anymore, or the tools are broke, and so you have to fix the tools. It could be that the person doesn't agree with the expectation. That's called commitment, okay? If you can't sell them on being committed, then you got to sell them on taking that walk out the door, all right? Go someplace else. But
well, you really don't got to sell them on that one, right?
I'm a Brian Tracy fan. He says, don't fire people. He says, bring them in to your office, sit them down, and sell them on quitting, so that you don't fire them, they resign.
And now, based on what you said, I agree, right? Because it could be many factors, but you're still holding them accountable. But I also look at it, accountability is, I also hold higher ups accountable, or I hold other department heads accountable. Right. So,
well, yeah. I mean, that's what I was saying, because
they're holding you accountable for the tools, right? They're holding you accountable for training. They're holding you. They should. And if you're not getting the tools, they need to know when to step up and say, I need this, and I'm doing my part. I got to hold you accountable to do your part, even though I report to you.
Yeah, as I said, all right. If the manager, whatever level he is, looks at the numbers and they're not right, he has 4 different factors that he can investigate and say, which of these 4 factors is it? Okay, is it training? Is it commitment? Is it tools? Is it knowledge of the expectation? All right, and then as a manager, troubleshoot those. By the way, those are all the responsibility of the manager. They're not the responsibility of the employee. Theoretically, if you hired him, he was qualified. All right. Theoretically, okay, what happened is, if he's not motivated, then you must have demotivated, because when you interviewed him, he was motivated. What'd you do? I'd be saying to my manager, if he came to me and said, well, he's demotivated, I'd be saying, what'd you do to demotivate him? I'll tell you what the most demotivating thing a manager can do, and it's because they're incompetent managers, okay, is they can come along and say, my guys aren't making their calls. Okay, that's the problem. And I say, no, that's not the problem. The problem is you don't know why they should be making the calls, and therefore you haven't convinced them that it's important to make the calls. The problem is you. Okay, because if they understood the value of those 60 calls a day, if they saw that it was putting money in their pocket, if they were sold on it, they'd be doing 120 a day. Right? But the problem lies with you haven't sold them on the idea. So maybe the sales manager needs to go to sales manager training.
They don't know what they don't know, right? We've talked about that before. And then number two, we have it on another podcast, and they should listen to Frontline Sales Manager podcast, because a lot of times the sales manager needs a lot more training than sometimes the salesperson, right? Because no one teaches the leadership and management training in sales. So, but accountability, like I said, I want to say focus on accountability. And I thought this was great stuff. I think there's accountability that should go horizontal and vertical, right? So there are times, when I'm in the capacity of an interim CSO, my responsibility is my people, my revenues, my systems and processes. But I'm also responsible for the other departments that are influencing the effect of sales. They don't report, but if we're doing, like I always tell our teams, do everything that's in your power, then we could talk to other departments. But don't throw stones. So,
Well,
yes.
When you say in other departments, like who are they blaming?
Well, it's not a matter of whether you're blaming or not, because the blaming then is, that's just an excuse. And I'm not a big guy on excuses, right? But like you said, if a salesperson is doing everything that they're doing, and it could be the manager, it could be the tools, it could be everything. But you could have a situation where a company, and we had a client that relies a lot on their marketing, and they may have multiple locations, and several locations aren't performing well. And we come in to be able to grow their sales from our capacity. But to some degree, the marketing department now has to be held accountable to look at the data to why they're not getting the traffic they're supposed to be getting. So it's not a matter of blaming someone. It's a matter about, every leader should hold each other accountable to do their part of the process.
Well, okay, so based on the 4 places there's a problem, okay, what you've just told me is that there's a tool problem. Okay, the machine tool, to put it in less virtual terms, there's a machine tool that the salespeople in that environment are using, and it's whatever the marketing department is producing in the form of leads. And if the leads aren't coming in, and you have a sales system that's dependent on leads and they're not coming in, then one of your machines is broke. Now, I don't mean a physical machine with gears, I mean virtual gears. Whatever that machine is supposed to do, okay, should be measured. It should be accountable. You should know that we're supposed to get X number of leads into this pipeline, and if they're not coming, somebody's got to go fix the machine. And in that case, all right, where in some environments the salesperson can take their own initiative and go get their own leads, but not all environments are like that. In some cases, they're stuck waiting for their tool to be fixed, i.e., the marketing machine. All right, so in that case, I can understand where, boy, if the salespeople are saying, well, this is the problem. Okay, we have a sales system. The numbers are supposed to work like X, but we're not getting, okay, this variable in from the other department. Okay, management, their manager should be on top of that. And if the manager isn't even aware that that's going on, there's some issues with management.
And no doubt, and that's what I meant by departments, right? When in other words, you have some organizations that it's built that way, right? It's all marketing based, but there are things that you could put in efficiencies to do your own marketing, to do the things that you need to do. All I'm saying is you got to hold departments accountable. Another example is fulfillment, right? Let's say, you're a manufacturing company that we talk about, and the salespeople are bringing in the sales, but the fulfillment process is not getting done. The orders are late. Just several things happen. So you got to hold that department accountable. Right. So it's no different than a football. I'm a big sports guy. So a football team, you could be the greatest defense in the world and your offense can't put up numbers. Well, you got to hold your offense accountable. You could be the greatest offense. I don't know if you remember Dan Fouts with San Diego a long time ago. They used to put up crazy numbers, but their defense was terrible. So they could put up 42 points. And in in most situations, people would say there's no way they would lose, but they may lose 45-42.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just a matter of you're a team, right? So for me, a team is the entire organization, and knowing when to not make the excuse, but to be able to consistently go up the chain of accountability. But do not use it as an excuse. And then 2, make sure you're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing, because I don't believe in trying to have someone accountable for something, but yet I'm not doing my part.
Right. We've seen this. This happens a lot in software companies where they can't implement, where salespeople bring in large customers and the technology people aren't capable of getting the projects implemented in the way that they've said they could. I mean, we've seen Nike literally trash $1 billion software system. They had a totally automated logistics system, and it just didn't work. The people who sold them on it couldn't implement. I mean, I wonder if the guy got his commission on that or not.
That's funny you said that. We actually ended up having to stop a project that we were working on for an IT software development company, because we grew them by 67%, but because of the length of time, or they weren't prepared, they weren't able to hire a project man, a business analyst and programmers fast enough to fulfill the sales that were brought in.
Yeah, that happens a lot with software companies.
So the sad part is we 67%, it's impressive growth. And thank God with the team that we had and so forth. But, that's what I mean by holding other people accountable. Where I was running companies and my own companies, obviously the buck stops with me. But there are situations where we walk into from my company now, and the first thing I say to the rest of the team, if they ask me, well, where's the money going to come from, and how are we going to finance that? And when they say that to me, I don't know what your thoughts are. I tell them, that's not my problem. That's the CEO's problem. I'm doing my part. The CEO has to make sure that he's prepared, and I'm going to hold the CEO accountable to that. But at the same time, that's not my space. Let me be great at what I do, and my team does, and the CEO is responsible for their part. So if you want to have a conversation about that, you should talk to the CEO.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I thought this was a great session. And I thought this was important, right, coming off of a workshop we just did on accountability and commitment. And I'm looking forward to next week again, and we're going to continue on the processes that we have, whether it's target marketing, prospecting, lead management. But again, I appreciate us doing this. I feel that I'm getting value. I believe the listeners and everybody else is getting value. And so I'm excited and to keep this going as we've been. And you have a great weekend.
You too, Victor. It was great. It was pleasant.
Awesome.
You have a great week.